Hey everyone, Sam here. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are in the world. In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint a landscape that features an English cathedral green and one of the towers of Exeter Cathedral. Now, Exeter is a city that's located in Devon in southwest England, and it's actually the city that I grew up in. So even though I live here in New Zealand and I was born on the island of Guernsey, I actually grew up in England. Now, recently I've been really inspired by this guy. He's called Trevor Chamberlain. He was a British landscape painter, painted a lot of landscapes, seascapes, but also a lot of urban scenes. Especially buildings, and I just love these paintings. They've just really inspired me lately to want to have a go at painting some buildings. So I was going through my photo reference of the last time I was in Exeter, which was about 5 years ago. Actually, that was the last time I visited England, and I didn't have that many photos that were usable, but I managed to find a couple that I could create some paintings from, and this is one of them. So throughout this video, I'm going to give you some tips on painting buildings, painting trees as well, and some tips on composition. Now, just before I start the video, I'd like to quickly tell you about my Patreon channel. Each month I upload a full-length painting tutorial video, plus reference photos, lesson notes, and also content as well during the month, all for just $5 a month. And I've put the link in the description box below. So without further ado, we'll get straight into the video, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm painting on an 8" by 10" linen panel, and it's an oil primed medium weave linen that's mounted to Baltic birch. It's pre-made and actually made by a company called SourceTech in the USA at canvaspanels.com, and I've put a link to their website in the description box below. I'm using oil paint here, and I'm sketching out my composition using burnt sienna mixed with liquin. Liquin's the medium I'm using. It speeds up the drying time, which is one of the main reasons I use it, actually, just for the convenience. It also improves the flow of the paint. Now, just having a quick look at my reference photo here, I was in Exeter a few years ago and I only took a few photos in the town, so most of my photos weren't that great. There was literally just a couple that I could use to create a painting such as this one, and that's the case with this painting here. But with this part of the cathedral here and the trees in the foreground, I thought this would make a nice composition. Now, just like with my other landscape paintings, whenever I start a painting, the first thing I think about are where are all the dark values and shadows in the scene that I'm painting. And if you've watched my other videos, you will have heard me repeat this in each one of them. And I find that repetition is a great way of learning. So I always start by painting the dark values first. Value refers to how light or dark a subject is. That also includes the shadows, like these cloud shadows here. And the general rule of thumb is we'll find our darkest darks and our lightest lights in the foreground, but then as landforms recede, darks are not as dark and lights are not as light, and that's because the value scale of which it's represented narrows. So I started off painting the clouds here using a mix of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, titanium white, and a little alizarin crimson, and I've actually used the same colours here in this part of the shadow area of the cathedral. And I've used less titanium white in the mix to make the value darker. Now, painting this tower part of the cathedral here, I'm just thinking of it as a shape and just identifying where the shadows are and where the areas of light are. And then I do the same with the trees as well. So the trees in this painting are the darkest values to be found in this landscape, and that's because trees in general are usually the darkest values to be found in the landscape, especially when they're growing as a stand of trees or a forest, because you get a lot of occlusion shadows. Conifer trees are particularly dark in value, but also deciduous trees when they're in full leaf, such as these horse chestnuts here that I'm blocking in. And then the sycamore in the foreground is a bit lighter in value. But I'm blocking these shadow areas in first, and the shadow mix I've used for these trees here is ultramarine blue and a little yellow ochre, so it has a nice green cast to it, but also a dark value. Now, I'll just quickly go over the colours I'm using. I'm using Blue Ridge oil paints. They're a beautiful artist quality oil to use. I love using these, and the colours I'm using includes titanium white,
burnt sienna, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, cadmium red light, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue and phthalo green. And I believe you can paint any landscape with these colours, including urban scenes such as this one. Now the tone of the green in this sycamore tree is a little bit different, so I've gone heavier with the yellow ochre in the mix, and even there's a small amount of titanium white in there. So my main shadows are blocked in. I've established the tonal dynamic in the painting, and this is the advantage of blocking in the shadows first, is it's quickly easy to see the atmospheric perspective that you can create, and then it makes it easier to add in the areas in light afterwards. So I've now painted some of the highlights in the clouds. This is a mix of titanium white with a little burnt sienna. And now I'm painting the sky, and the sky is a mix of titanium white with some ultramarine blue. So a nice simple mix, some nice clean colour here as well. I try and keep my colour mixes in general as simple as possible. It's not always possible, especially when you're mixing greens, but I'm always thinking about the colour harmony. So this is where the colours are pleasing to the viewer, and we can do this by using common colours throughout the painting. So trying to use similar colours throughout the whole thing, and it ties all the zones together. So now I'm painting this stone colour in the tower here in the cathedral, and I've used a mix of yellow ochre, burnt sienna, titanium white and a little ultramarine blue, and the ultramarine blue is going to desaturate it. It's a low chroma colour as well, and actually when I took the photo, this side of the tower here of the cathedral was only just starting to come into light, and perhaps at the time if I was thinking about painting buildings I would have got some better photos in it when the full sun was right on it. So the light's only just appearing on it, but it's enough that it's going to make it look interesting in this painting. So just marking in these basic stony colours. As I say, it's a low chroma colour, which means the intensity of it is not particularly bright. And then next I'm painting in some of these windows, and I've used a shadow mix of ultramarine blue with some burnt sienna, titanium white and a little alizarin crimson. Now as it's during the block-in stage, I'm not concerned about detail at all, and actually overall with this painting, because it's not very big as well, I want to keep it a bit more loose and painterly. The advantage of painting landscapes is you can make them look really natural, but rigid buildings it can be a little bit more difficult. But I want this cathedral to flow with the rest of the painting. So now I'm painting the grass, and this is a mix of yellow ochre with some cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue. So that's my kind of basic green mix that I use for not only grass but tree foliage as well. And then from then on I adjust the value by mixing in some titanium white. I knock the green back a bit by adding a colour that contains red. So in this case I added a bit of cadmium red. Red is opposite to green on the colour wheel, so it's just going to desaturate it a bit and make it look more natural. There's also a little bit of phthalo green in there as well, and that just shifts the hue of the green, so there's some emerald tones in there. I also pretty much use these same colours in the horse chestnut trees as well. Here I'm painting some of the highlight areas, the areas in light on this sycamore tree. I'm pretty sure the sycamore trees are kind of variegated form of it, so there's some lighter greens in there, more yellowish greens. So I've used the same colours that I've used in the grass, but there's a lot more cadmium yellow and titanium white in the mix. Now this green mix that I've just talked about, I generally only use for areas that are in the foreground of my painting, where we're going to find our most saturated colours. You can get some really nice rich greens with this colour mix, especially if you're mixing in some phthalo green as well, but you've got to be careful not to make the colour look too saturated or too garish. It'll look unnatural in the painting and pretty displeasing. If I was going to paint some distant greens, then I probably wouldn't use any cadmium yellow at all. At this point in the painting I was just starting to paint the suggestion of a network of stems and branches in this sycamore tree in the foreground, and I've just used a mix of ultramarine blue with a little burnt sienna, and you can create some very dark values with this colour and actually almost a near black. I don't ever use pre-mixed blacks, I always like to mix my own. The blocking in stage was getting close to completion, and here I'm just adding a few shadows in these windows in the tower here. Using the shadow mix I made earlier on, and that was ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white and a little alizarin crimson. And then I'm using the same colours for some of these darker areas in these windows, but with much less titanium white, so that's going to make the value darker. And the other thing I'm painting here is some shadows in this footpath, again using ultramarine blue, burnt sienna and titanium white. The shadows are really going to make the painting here, make it look much more realistic and three-dimensional, and also communicate a nice warm summer day in this cathedral green scene that I'm painting here. Also at the end of the painting I painted the suggestion of a few people in the distance as well, which adds life to the painting. At this point I was getting close to finishing the blocking in stage, and I'm just going over some of these forms in the painting, restating the dark values, and then I let the painting dry for a few days. At this point now I was starting to work in some detail in the painting, and the brush I'm using here is a synthetic No. 0 round brush. The paintbrushes I'm using are made by Rosemary & Co. I've been using these brushes for years, and if you want to get hold of some Rosemary & Co. brushes, I'll put a link in the description box below. Another brush I've found useful for painting buildings is this ivory dagger brush. Again, it has synthetic hairs on it, so you can get some really nice accurate marks with it. I can use the broad end of the brush for some lines like I have here, and also the tip of the brush for some finer detail. Now I'm using the same colour mix that I was using before. If you remember, this was yellow ochre with burnt sienna, titanium white and also ultramarine blue to desaturate, but I've added some darker tones in there as well. And then just emphasising some of these shadows in the ridges along the tower here. Sorry, I don't know the technical terms for some of these parts of the cathedral. But as I'm adding more detail here on this cathedral tower, I'm thinking about where the shadows are, and then later on I painted a few highlights on it as well. I'll also just quickly talk about the composition, because obviously the tower here is the main focal area, and the footpath here adds rhythm to this painting. It's leading the eye towards it, and then the trees are adding some balance and interest to the overall scene. Just a few tips on composition: never ever have your focal area right in the middle of your composition, because it doesn't look good in a painting and it creates this awful kind of static that's really displeasing. It feels like an obstacle in the way of the flow of the composition. So here, the main focal area, being the tower of this cathedral, is to the left of the centre. Also, with regards to horizon lines, never have your horizon line in the middle of the painting. So here, this is a lower horizon line. Part of the reason is so that I can fit the trees and the tower in the whole painting as well. Also, making sure that the top of the cathedral isn't touching the top of the canvas. I've left some space for the sky there as well. It's already communicating that this is quite high, this tower, so it adds a little bit of drama to the painting. Now right here I'm just adding a few highlights to some of these windows. This is where the sun's just catching the edges of it, the full sun. And I've used a mix of titanium white with just a little bit of yellow ochre and some burnt sienna. Now this is where I spent some time just paint modelling here, just making that cathedral tower look natural and in fitting with the rest of the painting. So I spent a bit of time on this, and I actually decided to really focus on the detail in the cathedral tower first of all before I continue with the rest of the painting, because for me this is the most difficult part of the painting, and I haven't painted too many buildings so far, so I'm kind of learning as I paint here as well. But I just stick to the main rules of painting in general, just keeping an eye on my values, where are my lights and darks in the scene. And overall I've just treated the cathedral tower here as a mass along with the rest of the other elements within the painting. I was happy with the way the cathedral was coming along here, and then I added more details to the clouds and the sky, also using the sky and clouds itself to just tidy up some of the negative spaces around the cathedral tower. At this point in the painting I left the cathedral tower. There's just a few more details to be added once it's dry again at the end of the painting, where I'll be adding my final details as well as my lightest values. I always, in general, save the lightest values in my paintings until the very end. So actually overall, I even keep the values in my paintings a little bit darker as I work through it, so that I've got plenty of room to add those final highlights, and that's usually what brings the whole painting to life and makes it pop. Now here I'm adding some highlights to this sycamore tree, again using the same colours as I used before, but this time with more titanium white in the mix to make the value lighter. So this was a little bit of yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, a small amount of ultramarine blue and titanium white. Those are the main colours in there as well. I also mixed in a small amount of alizarin crimson just to get a red element in that green as well. Then once I'd painted the highlight areas, I just painted some reflected light in some of these leaves in the shadow area. This just helps to bulk out the tree, make it look more rounded and more realistic. And I mostly used a number 3 filbert brush. This is a great brush to use for painting trees because you can use the broad end of the brush for larger marks, but it has a nice rounded edge for more finer marks, so I could paint the suggestion of leaves. At this point in the painting, I'd let it dry again, and this was the last session that I spent on this, where I was adding final details to bring the whole thing to life and get it finished. And one of the things I did here was I wanted to add a bit more texture to the stonework in this cathedral tower here. Again, it's using the same colours that I used during the earlier stages, but I went a bit heavier on the burnt sienna and yellow ochre, but also trying to keep the value roughly the same. And then once I'd done that, I then carried on working on this sycamore tree here, painting the final highlights. Again, it's the same colours as before, there's just a lot more titanium white in the mix, and I'm just sparingly applying some of these highlights. This is where my number 3 filbert brushes come in really useful. I added some more layers to the grass to create texture within it, and then I painted some more of the suggestion of the main stems and branches within this sycamore tree in the foreground. So I'm now getting into the much finer details here. Then next I added some more details to the tower in the cathedral, restating some of these dark values and emphasising the windows, and again using a mix of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna and a little titanium white. I'm also using really small brushes here, and I was using a mix of number 0 and 00 synthetic round brushes. I finished up the painting by painting the suggestion of a few people in the scene, just to give the whole painting some life and communicating a nice English summer day on the Cathedral Green. There's some people sitting down in the distance and people walking along the path. I have to say I really enjoyed painting this artwork. I'm just finishing it up here by just adding a few more details. I always find it a little bit difficult to know when my paintings are finished, but it was around here that I decided the painting was complete. I'm definitely going to be painting some more building scenes. As I say, I'm really inspired by Trevor Chamberlain. I just love his artwork, so I'll be making some more videos on this in the future.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also hit the bell notification to be notified of new videos, and feel free to leave me a comment in the comment section below. Now if you'd like to learn more about painting, check out my Patreon channel. Each month I upload a full-length painting tutorial video plus lesson notes, reference photos and other content throughout the month. So if you want to improve your painting skills, then I've got over 2.5 years worth of videos on my Patreon channel. So it's like a landscape painting course, and I cover things that people have difficulties with, such as getting your colours right and your values, composition. These were the same problems that I had, and I make it easy for you to understand this, and I show it and demonstrate it in the context of a painting. So it's not all dry art theory. I can explain this to you as we paint a subject. So check the link below. It's just $5 a month. Now if you check out my website at samuela.com, I've got some free painting content on there, some free written painting tutorials, also some individual full-length painting tutorial videos for sale there as well. And if you subscribe to my email list, I'm giving away a free ebook on Introduction to Oil Painting. So I've put all those links in the description box below. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are in the world, and I shall see you in the next video.